I'm going to try and turn on my webcam real quick. Hopefully this does not kill anybody's bandwidth. For some reason, it is not picking up my webcam, though. Let's see. Oh, there we go. I've got a nice fancy one, and it's not picking that one up at all. So hi, everybody. You're here today because I want you to stop using the cloud. I really do. Please stop using it. So let's get into this a little bit more. First, a quick introduction. You're here for Pragmatic Works. This is our training on the T's. We're happy you're here. If you're interested in any of our products, services, or training, please make sure and go to our website, pragmaticworks.com, afterwards. I've got an introduction slide following up after this in just a minute. My name is Bradley Ball. I'm our Data Platform Management Lead, and I've got my contact information right here. A little about me as a speaker. I've got a little around 15 years of IT experience. Previous cool stuff I've done, I've been a DBA for the Executive Office of the President, also for the U.S. Army. Currently, I'm the Data Platform Management Lead for Pragmatic Works, and what that means is I have a team of very smart consultants that I work with, from everything from cloud engagements to APS engagements to traditional SQL Server to BI to big data. We cover pretty much the entire stack, and I'm responsible for them. I have a VTSP for Microsoft, and what that means is that you may call Microsoft at some point in time and ask them for help, and if you do that, chances are they're going to give me a call, and I'll get on the phone with you, or one of my colleagues might get on the phone with you and help you understand how you could use the technology stack at Microsoft to be able to help you out. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and the only two books I've written on currently are the 2012 Pro Practices and the 2014 SQL administration book from Rocks. I'm on Twitter at SQLballs. My email is bball@pragmaticworks.com. Please feel free to shoot me some follow-up questions if you have them after this. I always like to hear from people, especially when we're doing these talks back and forth. And also, if you want to go to my website, see any content I've got up there at SQLballs, I will be posting this deck, a PDF version of it afterwards. So the first thing that I want you to do is we need to take a deep breath, and we need to stop. I want you to stop using the cloud. Don't stop believing, but I do need you to please just stop using the cloud. You've really got to stop doing that. There's a good reason why. The thing is, the cloud was a good idea when it came out at the time, but people just shake their head no now when you bring it up in a conversation. Whenever I actually hear the question, are you currently using the cloud as part of your strategy? Are you looking at using a cloud integrated strategy? Cloud, cloud, cloud. It's literally like nails on a chalkboard to me. I want to make people stop. Very early on, the cloud was a marketing term. Essentially, when we talk about the cloud, it's not really a cloud. It's a data center. It's multiple data centers hosted by Microsoft. It's a technology stack and its offerings. When we talk about technology, it's important for us to differentiate the way that technology actually works versus just saying the cloud. If I say to someone, what do you think about the cloud? Chances are they're going to have a negative reaction. There was a point in time during early adoption where this was kind of forced down our throat, where it was cloud this, cloud that, cloud first. We're all in on the cloud. Everybody remembers all that stuff. That was really great marketing to make us talk about it. Unfortunately, a lot of the perception of what the cloud was still lingers around. A little bit like fog, but not quite a cloud. In the beginning, the performance wasn't as good as we would have liked. The offerings were very, very small. So that led to a first impression that overall wasn't as positive as you would like to have, especially if you're looking at being a technology adopter. So when we get to those first impressions, what did we have? We had, a lot of questions. You would look at things, and we had a limited version of SQL Server and Platform as a Service, and then we had virtualization for Infrastructure as a Service. And sure, there was some other service offerings, such as Service Broker and things of that nature, but they didn't really fit in for us as SQL Server people, as IT professionals that use the traditional Microsoft stack. If you had your own data center, why would you use the cloud? Chances are, if you have your own data center, you have your own virtualization platform set up. If you have your own virtualization platform set up, why am I all of a sudden standing up infrastructure as a service VMs in Azure? Initially, there was no way to really tie the cloud together with my data center, and not being able to tie the cloud together with the data center, it raised a lot of issues. Why would I create a whole set of VMs that I couldn't necessarily access within the domain controls that I have? Early paths, you couldn't even use SSMS with it, and it was a stripped down version of SQL Server. We always knew that there was a longer roadmap there to be able to get us closer to parity, but when we first got platform as a service, we weren't quite there. The use cases, while there were use cases, were very limited. For small companies and small organizations, I could absolutely see the use case for not setting up an infrastructure, for being able to go to the cloud. But if you did that, there were plenty of other service vendors that were out there that were just hosted service providers. One of the other frustrating things is because the cloud is starting to gain a little bit of traction, hosted service providers sometimes are calling themselves the cloud. Let me tell you something. It's not. We need to start with all this cloudiness. It really obscures what we're trying to do, which is to find a solid technological solution to the things that are facing our businesses and our organizations. Security has always had a bad rep for the cloud, but that's one of the things that I want to talk about because security has always been misunderstood. Security has always been quite good at the cloud level for Microsoft. If you're looking at the iCloud, not so good, but for the Microsoft portion of the stack, for their individual data centers, for what they were doing, and that's the thing you really want to think about. It's not some nebulous cloud floating up in the sky. We're going to Microsoft data centers that have to pass all the rigorous inspections and security that Microsoft would want them to have. And also the SaaS offerings, they were limited too. Yeah, we just want to stop. So what do I want you to use? First off, I don't want us to look at using the cloud anymore as a term. I want us to look at using individual terminology for technology offerings and the stack. I want us to hit the reset button. That's the first thing we're going to do. I want you to use the right tool for the job. I want to make sure that's absolutely clear. Whenever I talk to people, there are pros and cons about using a Microsoft data center, using something within the Azure platform. We have to talk through those, and there are good reasons to set up each individual solution. I've been working with folks for a long time on APS engagements, and people look at the APS appliance oftentimes and they go, hey, here's this great, fabulous, big machine, I want to use it. And there's specific ways you're supposed to use it, and if you don't use that machine in the right ways, you're honestly going to get really bad results. But that's the same thing for trying to take a square peg and shove it down a round hole. It's not going to be an easy process. You could eventually force it in there, but you're going to cut some corners, literally, as part of that process. So when we look at the different portions of technology stacks, I want you to look at big data. When you look at big data, you could want big data on Windows, you could want big data on Linux, you could be looking at Cloudera, you could be looking at Hadoop. There's a ton of other vendors out there that are doing big data as well. But as we've seen that market kind of solidify, those are the two names that you typically hear, or I typically see when I go into IT projects. Nobody's really on a top-end system running Voldemort or something like that. A lot of times they're probably, even if they're doing Hadoop, they're looking at Hortonworks, or they're partnering with Hortonworks, and then they've got them in, if they're doing on-prem, doing an on-prem Hortonworks cluster. Little secret for you, that's the same stuff that's sitting in Azure data centers. So if you want to use Hadoop, one of the things we're going to talk about is what's actually sitting up there and when it's important for us to understand how to use the right technology. Tier 3 archival storage, that's something that organizations have to worry about over and over again. I remember when the largest database that I had to worry about was 128 gigs, and that seemed huge at the time. That seems downright manageable nowadays. Really, really not that big. Just the other day, I was working on a 10 terabyte system. The day before that, I was working on a 40 terabyte system. When we look at terabytes and terabytes of data, it's something that we commonly see people at an enterprise level, not just having terabytes, but having petabytes worth of data within the storage system. If you need advanced analytics, a lot of companies are looking at the way that they can not only take that data that may be historical, that they've got sitting on that tier 3 storage, but the way they can apply analytics to it. And there's a lot of different players within that game. You've got Revolution R, which Microsoft acquired. You've got different ways that you can look at the data, whether you're using data mining, whether you're using reporting techniques, whether you're using custom algorithms. A lot of different ways that you can analyze this stuff. Real-time reporting. I can't tell you how many customers I sit down with, and one of the things they say is, we want to report on this, and we want to report on this as real time as possible. It's a nice phrase to say, but there's a lot of dollar signs that go behind that, because one of the key things you have to do is understand how you can take your data, stream it in such a way that it's immediately consumable, and then turn it into something that you can then offer up to users that's actually in a usable business format. Because it's one thing to take a lot of data and say, hey, look, we've stored data. It's a completely other thing to take that data and transform it and actually make intelligent business decisions off of it. When we get to networking, we've got our own things that we've got to cover. Often when we look at networking between our client locations and where we're consuming our data from our data centers. If we have multiple data centers, the data going between our two data centers, once we get within our data centers, if we have something like a federated SSRS farm or we have a SharePoint farm or something like that, we're looking at how we're going to do load balancing. We're looking at how we can do traffic routing. The SAN replication between data centers, data replication, is often very expensive because not only do we need to have SANs in place that can participate this in both data centers, but then we need a pretty wide pipe to be able to account for the data rates that we need to transfer data back and forth. I've been with clients where we were transferring about 32 petabytes of data per day between data centers. The cost of that was a pretty big cost. It was not insubstantial. So it takes time to build out all these infrastructures, to be able to address things from big data, from BI concerns, to advanced analytics, to regular OLTP systems. A lot of time to be able to build out this infrastructure. So when we talk technology, the way that I want you to think about this is think about SQL Server. I love SQL Server, love it. If SQL Server was a woman, I would marry her and take her last name. Love her that much. It's not always the right technology, and I hate to say that. You know, I can't stop loving you, SQL Server, but sometimes SQL Server is just not the right technology for the job. And even when it is the right technology for the job, it can often be misunderstood. I'll give you an example of where it's not the right technology for the job. I was once a DBA at a large Fortune 100 organization, and they wanted to collect machine data off of all these different machines that they had going throughout a very large facility. Each machine was going to give us about 300 megabytes of data per hour. And let's just say that we had a little over 12,000 machines. Well, if you do the math, that's, you know, gigabytes of data per hour. When you look at that per day, that's terabytes of data. And one of the things that they asked me right away is how we're going to get this data into SQL Server. I said, we're not. Because when you look at SQL Server, you've got to make sure you understand the technology. It has something called ACID, atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. Really fancy terms, but essentially it makes sure that all the data is transactionally consistent. It makes sure when I insert this data and I place it into my database that I am assured that the data is going to be stored in the right way. Well, the right technology for us was actually using Hadoop, was being able to throw massive amounts of data into a system that didn't observe ACID, that allowed those files to just land, and then allowed us to be able to write queries across them and mine them to be able to find out information about them. When we get into SQL Server itself, there are tons of misunderstandings when it comes to licensing. My good friend SQL Chicken, Jorge Segarra, often tells me that Microsoft licensing is one part magic and one part dark voodoo. So there's not a lot of clear understanding of it. It's open to a lot of interpretation. And a lot of that gets into the additions you use, the size of the business you are. And when you look at additions of SQL Server, people are often confused of what addition should I use. There's a BI addition. There's an enterprise edition, there's a standard edition, there's an express edition. And they don't understand sometimes that different features are enabled as you go up to those top level editions. I see a lot of folks that plan for their BI environments and think, well, naturally I should be on BI edition. But BI edition has a subset of some of the things that are in enterprise edition, which is your world-class, your Starship Enterprise type of edition. Not only that, once we get out of the versions, the out-of-the-box setup, often there's issues with that. I teach full-day performance tuning sessions at SQL Saturdays. I do, a week-long course and a 3-day course for us sometimes here at Pragmatic Works. And one of the key things that I try and help people understand is just the out-of-the-box configuration, the things they should be touching, the things they shouldn't be touching. And don't even get me started about third-party ORM tools and the way that they can write queries that don't semantically follow the best practices for writing queries for SQL Server. As much as I love SQL Server, as you get to more advanced topologies that you need to lay SQL Server down, you get to more and more things that you've got to make sure that you configure just right. The key to understanding SQL Server is understanding the technologies. So one thing I want to ask you, just to give you a quick understanding of how we should break these technologies down, is if I said to you, give me a SQL Server expert, what do they need to know? Well, let's talk about what they need to know. Because if you're looking at the database engine, you've got replication, you've got mirroring, clustering, always-on availability groups, in-memory OLTP, clustered and non-clustered column store indexes, depending on your version, and even more coming in 2016. We're going to have Polybase. That's going to add quite a bit. Not to mention, what about performance troubleshooting? We've got extended events, DMVs, different ways that we need to be able to lay this out. Virtualization, I haven't even begun to hit on that. How does SQL Server perform in a virtualized environment? What's the best way to set it up for Hyper-V or for VMware? Analysis services, I mean, let's look at that. That seems pretty straightforward, right? But we've got two different types of cubes we could be using. We could be using a regular AS cube, in which case if I have some complex things that I need to figure out, calculations, perhaps some performance key indicators or some KPIs, key performance indicators, sorry about that, I'm probably going to need to use MDX. What about tabular cubes? Well, tabular cubes, I'm going to need to use DAX. And chances are, there are cases where you try and do something in a tabular cube with DAX that hasn't quite been replicated from MDX yet. We've got some limitations. There are cases to use each one of these cubes. I probably don't want a mirroring and replication expert hired as my AS guy to write my cubes. And then integration services, because we got to get the data in the data warehouse for us to load in our cubes when we process the cube, right? We've got control flow tasks, data flow tasks, data connectors, event handlers, parameters. How do I know how to log my package? Now, granted, Pragmatic Works has some great tools for that, but if I don't have those tools, I need to understand how to log. I need to understand on air where I can go and I can trigger events to occur. Control flow task and data flow task each have a myriad of possibilities. Reporting services. I've got simple reports I can do. I could use a source as tables where I'm actually binding to individual fields. I could use the source as a stored procedure. I could have nested reports. I've got the security that I've got to do, and I didn't even get into federation here if I've got to have multiple reports up, not to mention subscription reports and ad hoc reports. And there's more features coming for SSRS in 2016. Master data management, we've got workflows, we've got data architecture that we've got to set up, data quality services. I need to establish who my stewards are and make sure that I've got a good way to actually check the validity of my data. So when I just said, give me a SQL Server expert, what do they need to cover there? Because that's a whole lot they need to cover. So let's take a second chance look at the cloud real quick. And remember, we're not calling it that anymore. We're talking about Azure. We're talking about the platform. We're talking about Microsoft data centers where they have an infrastructure already built out for us. First off, we've got Power BI for visualizations. If you haven't played around with Power BI, you should. There's still a free edition out there. They're doing, in some cases, weekly cadence releases to be able to have hyper-competitive reports available. The dashboards look really, really good. The reports you can do. If you can currently use Power BI in Excel, you can upload a Power BI from Excel very, very easily and be able to have a simple Power BI report that you can see. Platform as a service. We're on V12, version 12 of Platform as a Service. This gives us almost full parity to the box product. We have full text search, we have column store indexes, we have heaps, clustered indexes, non-clustered indexes. There's still some size limitation, and they've changed the mechanism that's doing the copy process in the back end. But the last time I checked, I could still use a lot of good community tools on Platform as a Service now that I couldn't in the past. Jason Straight's SP index analysis script is one that works really well. I was able to use Atom Mechanics script not long ago. I think they changed something recently in one of the releases, and that might not work anymore. But it was really nice to be able to use that for performance troubleshooting, to give me as a DBA a little bit of visibility. Fully works with SQL Server Management Studio now. So I put my credentials in. As long as I have been authenticated from my workstation, which isn't that difficult to do, I can connect to my PAS databases. Some of the features that will be in 2016 going to be rolled out in PAS before we actually get them in the box product. The clustered in-memory OLTP column stores are currently in V12, which are specifically supposed to increase performance for OLTP level systems. For infrastructure as a service, we now have small, medium, and large VM size offerings. You could stand up SharePoint there. You could stand up reporting services. There's a bunch of pre-baked images, Service Broker, and I blanked on the other one I was going to say, but SQL Server, and they have images for SQL Server data warehouses and in-memory and for OLTP systems that are just optimized for those. So IOPS can still be a bit of an issue with some of our IaaS systems. But there's an IOPS throttle control where if you need more IOPS to be able to get the high level of performance that you've traditionally had on-premise, then you're going to be able to get that. So that performance should not be an issue any longer. When we look at Hadoop, we've got HD Insight, which you can get on Windows. You can also get in Linux. HD Insight is essentially the Hortonworks Hadoop flavor that was developed being partnered with Microsoft. You've also got Cloudera, and you've got Spark that was just released for HD Insight systems. Azure Data Factory, essentially think of this kind of like SSIS for big data systems. Azure Data Factory allows you to be able to take massive sets of data and be able to move them up to Azure storage very, very quickly. Stream Analytics. Stream Analytics, essentially think of queue-based messaging. I worked for a company once that used this throughout their organization, and using queue-based messaging, you can do some really interesting things. You can tie that together with BizTalk, and you can actually have SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata, and Formix all talk to one another. And you can send messages throughout an organization. It's a very large proposition to be able to build, though, to be able to have that queue message system. And not only that, streaming analytics utilizes something called event hubs. And then those event hubs can push that data in multiple directions, and then we can actually consume that data through streaming analytics. Microsoft had a tool called, they still have a tool called Stream Insight. I'll be honest, I didn't see a lot of people adopting this for SQL Server. And part of it is you essentially had to set up a server that would catch these things, hold it in memory, so you could see real-time data displayed. That's a pretty cool feature, and it's out there. SQL Data Warehouse. This is essentially APS for the cloud. There are some differences, though. I've worked very closely with some folks over at Microsoft on this, as well as a lot of people that are implementing APS. This is not a one-to-one ratio. You wouldn't have your dev environment as a SQL data warehouse and then have an APS on site. There's some specific terminology that's going to be a little bit different. They're in the private preview right now. A lot of these details are going to get released as it becomes more public, but there's a lot of good things. I mean, essentially what they've said that we're going to be able to do, and they've been showing us internally that they can do, is to be able to take hundreds of nodes, scale them up, pause them, and scale them down. when I see people that have an APS system, one of the key things that we see is we can take processes sometimes that run for 30 hours. We can get it down to 30 minutes to 15 minutes. Again, your performance will vary. It depends. You've got to make sure that you're using the APS system correctly. But I have seen volumes reduce at that amount. When you can do that, you often find that what you were spending 30 hours processing, if I can do that within 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I'm not using that appliance at a consistent rate. I've got some downtime windows. One of the great things about SQL Server Data Warehouse is that instead of having constant compute charges accrue while you're using their data center, you'll be able to pause it when you don't need to use it. You'll be able to scale up for exactly when you do need to use it to be able to get additional compute to make things go faster. That's a great way not only for a business to save money, but to also save on the infrastructure that they need to have. And then we've got a whole host of other things. DocumentDB, which is a big data solution to be able to store documents and have them be able to be searched using the Microsoft Data Center. Redis Cache to be able to help cache things for websites. The Data Lake offering that will be released very soon is going to be very cool. Going to offer you a large tier 3 storage type of environment where you can have petabytes worth of storage. If you don't currently have petabytes of storage available within your data center, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have that on demand? There's a scheduler to where you can actually schedule tasks throughout the Azure environment. So one of the key things that people look at is they look at setting up this whole environment and how can I schedule nightly jobs? How can I schedule a lot of individual things that I need to occur? Very similar to SQL Agent, but perhaps I want to schedule an Azure Data Factory job. Perhaps I want to schedule a task that's going to run against my SQL Server Data Warehouse. Perhaps I want to schedule spinning something up and spinning something down. Scheduler will assist you with that. For those folks that have to be able to have encryption keys, they have a key vault. Azure AD, if you're using Office 365, you can have your AD for your company federated with your Azure account. If you have MSDN, you can have that federated with infrastructure as a service, so you can pull from your MSDN account to be able to use that software offering that you have to be able to stand up IaaS machines very quickly in a dev environment. Express routes. If you're looking at the black fiber connectability that you have to have going between your data center and Azure to be able to start offloading things to a Microsoft data center, you have that capability. Traffic manager, load manager, site to site. The fact is there's a lot of very high offerings that we have. What I want you to do is I want to make sure that we start talking about things as a technology. The cloud is dead, long live the cloud. Let's talk about what's actually sitting in a Microsoft data center that you and your company do not need to stand up. I do have a client, a very large client, and they have multi-terabyte SQL servers. And one of the things we were looking at the other day was the cost of ordering the extra storage they were going to need. By comparison, that storage was pennies using a Microsoft data center and using the Microsoft platform to be able to store that data. So let's take a look at a couple things. I mean, if we want to do a Hadoop setup and configuration, because originally, remember, I asked the question in the early days, why would I want to virtualize in the cloud if I've already got that environment in my data center? Why would I want a limited version of SQL Server paths compared to what I could have on my own instances of SQL Server? Well, a lot of people, and there's been a ton of business articles about this lately, big data was the big buzzword for a long time, but nobody looked at the infrastructure that actually has to be set up to do this. To do this, you need to hire somebody who's going to maintain your Hadoop cluster, who's going to be able to set it up, who's going to be able to make changes to it. Those pizza boxes don't just network themselves. Those MapReduce jobs need to have someone who understands how to write Scoop to be able to do it. You need to be able to have someone who understands Hive to be able to lay that data layer on top of the data that's sitting out there in blob storage so you can run those Scoop queries against it. Machine learning and R support. There's a lot of drive for advanced analytics right now. I'm seeing a lot of companies as well that didn't traditionally look at business intelligence offering data sciences classes because everybody realizes that this is the next big buzz. It's a buzz, but it's also incredibly useful and it's useful today. I've got an example of a way that we're going to use this, and I'll get into that in a moment. But there have been companies using this for quite a while. Microsoft acquired R Revolution. That was a really big deal, and part of the reason is R has a bunch of assemblies out there, essentially called CRAN, that people have put together for free. And they run advanced computations. And as data scientists put these things together, often you will find these things being offered up for free in R. There are machine learning algorithms you can get off the Windows Store to be able to help put these together without having a data scientist. And data scientists are actually pretty expensive to be able to get and to hold on staff. Streaming analytics via queue-based messaging, that large infrastructure I told you that allowed all those different types of database instances to talk to one another, that didn't happen overnight. That happened over years. That took a lot of people and it took a lot of money. I remember within the development shop alone, they had only over 130 developers. That wasn't including their analysts or their architects or their DBAs. That was just developers. That's a lot of people. And if you don't have that level of people on staff to be able to set up this, why not use a Microsoft data center where they've already got this built? Petabytes worth of storage on your infrastructure as a service VMs, you literally have a checkbox where you can determine whether you want geo-replication between two Microsoft Azure data centers as a checkbox to be able to take care of your highly available VMs that may have mission-critical information on it. And let's not, skip over storage too much. When you look at this, and I went through the entire website, I've got a link right here for you to be able to look at. The Microsoft data centers that you will be working at, again, security was often something people overlooked. People assumed that things wouldn't be safe within the cloud because, again, the cloud is scary, the cloud is nebulous. When you look at a Microsoft data center, the rigorous inspections, adherence to different compliance programs that they have gone through to assure people that they are safe, they have a lot of information up there at their link about on Trust Center and compliance. These are just the names of the different compliance things that you'll see. Some of them are very, very familiar to you. Some will be more familiar based off the government organization you may work in or your country because they have a lot of certifications throughout different countries as well. But if you're looking for ISO, if you're looking for HIPAA, if you're looking for PCI, if you're looking for FedRAMP or SOC, or if you're looking for things for Australia or the UK or Singapore, there's an unbelievable amount of work that goes into this. If you look at your own organization and the level of auditing that you have to adhere to maintain compliance, this is a pretty huge infrastructure that, again, has already been built. So at this point in time, what I want to make sure that we do is I want to make sure that people realize, let's not use the cloud anymore. Let's look at specific technologies. Let's talk about the specific technology that we need to utilize, and that will help clear up our conversation quite a bit, because there's a lot of preconceived notions that come along with discussing things in general terms. So I wanted to give you a quick example of how some of this working together can really save you time to be able to set up an infrastructure. So the depth of offerings that we have, they've really allowed us to do some pretty cool things. So this is an example of being able to set up Twitter sentiment analysis. If you think about the companies that you have that you probably work for right now, whether you have restaurants, whether you have food products, whether you have sporting goods, whether you have consulting services, you would probably like to know what the sentiment is that is out there about your company on social media. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to look specifically at how we would live mine that Twitter sentiment, grab the data for specific hashtags that we're looking at, display what that sentiment may be live, and then also house and store that so we can run our own reports about that and aggregate it over time. So what are some of the things we're going to need for this? The required infrastructure, we're going to need some web services. We're going to use C#. You could use a lot of different languages. You don't have to use C#, but this was just the one that I wanted to use. We're going to look at having some queue-based messaging to be able to manage some of our systems and be able to feed that data in live. We need blob storage to be able to store that data, because let's say we've got a very large amount of data that's coming in off of an ad campaign or off something that we're doing. When you look at Twitter and you follow everybody and just literally a hashtag, you'll see a lot of tweets begin to stream by. We're going to need some Hadoop to be able to access that blob storage. This is not something necessarily we can put in SQL Server. In 2016, the cool thing is we could land this in Hadoop, and then we could throw a polybase table schema on top of it, and we could actually query it via T-SQL. But that'll be here in 2016. That's not going to be here quite yet for us to be able to do. I'd like a website for our live streaming analytics, and then let's do some Power BI for reporting. So do you have this sitting around in your data center? And if you do, how long would it take for you to build this? So this is a diagram of essentially what we're going to do. One of the things that you can see is that right here, I've got data coming in from Twitter. I've got two, what I'm going to use is cloud services from using the Azure framework, and each of them are going to pull in Twitter data. One of them, I'm going to use Sentiment 104, which is just a free service that you can utilize to be able to analyze the sentiment for this. And in the other, I'm going to use Azure Machine Learning to be able to do sentiment analysis for this. I'm going to take my filtered tweets, and I'm going to hit an event hub. When I hit this event hub within our Azure Data Center, I'm going to route my traffic in a couple different places. One, I'm going to consume live data. The other, I'm going to store for future analysis. So for future analysis, I'm going to hit some stream analytics where I will deposit this into blob storage. As it's sitting in blob storage, I've set up an HD Insight cluster over that blob storage. I may have used Hive, so that way I can map a structure on top of that. So that way we could then push a map reduce job to be able to pull that data out to display in a Power BI report. I've got two other services using Stream Analytics where I'm filtering this data. I've got aggregated tweets by topic and then aggregated tweets, and I'm feeding that into Event Hub. I've got one other web service that is working as a communicator role to put this within an Azure website to show a front end. Now, I hate to be a bit of a tease. I do have this built, but I'm not going to show it to you today. Josh Ludeman and I were doing a presentation at the past summit, Optimize All the Data. This is one of the things that we're going to build out as we look at actually using analysis, big data, and predictive analytics to be able to not only look at the data that's coming in for our pre-con, we're going to use the hashtags for our pre-con, but also to be able to pull some Power BI reports on it. We're going to have a lot of fun doing that. So if you make it to the past summit, we'll show you. We'll probably do a demo of this eventually here on one of the Pragmatic Works things, but you know, I got to do a little magician thing. I can't give away everything at this point in time. So now we're going to go to questions. The whole point of this talk was I want you to stop using the cloud. I really do want you to stop using the cloud. I want you to start talking specific technology. When you do that, you're going to invest the security within your end users that they actually know what you're talking about. But I also want you to be able to find people to work with that are the right technology vendors. Because otherwise, if I said, go work with a cloud vendor, that's going to cover a whole lot of topics and a whole lot of information. What do they actually do? What do you actually need to do? And what is the best service for you to be able to use? All right, Liz, I didn't see any questions come through the chat. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have a couple.
Excellent.
What are the timelines on Azure Data Lake and Azure SQL Data Warehouse?
So that's a great question. I've got to defer to Microsoft because I know a little bit about what they're planning to do, but I would say by what they would like to do is they would like to target the fall of this year. We've got to see how everything works out. But right now, SQL Data Warehouse is in private preview up in Redmond. There are some customers that they're working with. If you're interested in getting involved in that or you believe you've got a use case, you can contact us, or if you've got a good Microsoft rep, I would contact that Microsoft rep. They may be able to get you involved with the product team to see if there's a way for you to get into that private preview. What we've seen in other Azure programs is after they do a private preview, they do a public beta. So this is not me with any inside information. My assumption is after this private preview, we're going to see a public beta. Data Lake, I think, is in a similar state. eventually we're going to see Data Lake rolled out in a public beta. If you'll remember, Azure Machine Learning, that was available, but it was technically a beta for about a year. Power BI was available, but it was technically a beta for about a year. Microsoft has the goal to be able to get these out as quickly as possible, and once they can have everything working smoothly with the folks that they've got in private preview, I imagine we will see those in beta. So they probably have a better internal timeline, and I would talk to your Microsoft rep because they can probably give you more hard information. But I know that the target is to get it out to the general public as quickly as they possibly can.
Okay.
Great question.
You gave a lot of information. Someone wants to know where the best place to start learning about the cloud is.
Okay, absolutely. So again, what I would do is I would look at the specific technology. If you go to Azure.com, they've got a lot of different places where they've got a bit up on the technology. Also, if you go to Channel 9 for Microsoft, one of the things you'll find is that there are some cloud presentations. For example, the folks that are interested in SQL Data Warehouse, Microsoft did some presentations at Ignite, which used to be called TechEd. Those are all up for free to stream and to download on Channel 9. It is a wonderful hub to be able to get information. Every now and then they do SQL Server Unplugged live talk, and they will talk about topics that range from the entire stack. Even though Power BI and SQL DW are not technically the SQL Box product, the SQL Server Unplugged talks on Channel 9 will cover the entire stack. They'll have information sometimes about HD Insight that and what they're looking at doing in Azure platform as a service. But I would look at the specific technology because very similar to the Microsoft Box product, I know a lot about the DBA engine, the database engine, the different portions of the storage engine, the relational query system. I know a good bit about the business intelligence portion, but not as much as I do about the database intelligence side of the house. I know a lot about the cloud and a lot about APS, but not as much about big data as I would like. And so that's the thing is, I don't expect anybody to go out and master all of those things. That's a lot of work to actually do all that. So I would look at the specific technologies that you're looking at adopting. If platform as a service is something you're looking at, its parity to the Box product makes it easier than ever to be able to adopt. And so I would encourage you to go and take a look at that. And if you're looking at infrastructure as a service, again, that's essentially setting up a VM. So if you know how to set up a Hyper-V VM, you essentially understand how it's going to be provisioned behind the scenes, and then it's just setting up SQL Server once you get onto it. So some of these things translate through because it's just the technology that you already may be familiar with utilizing. So I would look at the specific technology areas you're looking at utilizing. Start with Azure.com. It's always got some good pointers. And then for technology-specific things, Microsoft Virtual Academy will normally have pretty good training classes as well for some on Azure ML, some on Platform as a Service, some on storage. They've got some good stuff on Hadoop. And then also if you're looking for specific training, and we at Pragmatic Works have a data science bootcamp we're doing. That's coming up in the fall pretty soon. We've got a big data class that my co-presenter at PASS, Josh Ludeman, teaches for us. So we've got a lot of great training on this stack of information as well. There's a lot of great places between Microsoft and ourselves where you can go get that information.
Okay. You spoke about Azure, but what do you think about AWS or other technologies? One of our vendors wants us to use AWS.
So to be flat out with you, I have no issue with AWS. AWS will not have the service infrastructure that Microsoft currently has, simply because they're not going to get Azure ML. They're not going to have Data Lake. They're not going to have the SQL DW service. They have Redshift. If you are a SQL shop, they have great VMs. They have some really cool options at AWS that I wish Microsoft would adopt for their Azure data centers. You have the ability to get specific SSDs for individual boxes, which helps them to be able to be more performant. From a VM perspective in and of itself, I think it's a great platform. When you look at Redshift, Redshift is a really good product. However, if you are currently a Microsoft shop and you want to continue to be able to use SQL, I would look at, especially if you're looking at Redshift, I would look at contacting Microsoft, because the SQL DW service, first off, it's going to use the same T-SQL that you know and love. So you've got that going for it immediately. The other thing is the plan to be able to scale up nodes and pause nodes. Um, the whole idea of the SQL DW is that the storage and the compute are desegmented. I want to say Sean Bice talked about that at Ignite. Um, where that really helps as a leg up over Redshift is Redshift, if I want to scale up or scale down my data, it takes hours. I mean, literally hours. Whereas with Microsoft, flip of a switch. So from a Redshift perspective, um, anybody who is a traditional SQL shop, I would really recommend that they look at SQL DW first before looking at Redshift. From a VM perspective, not really going to matter a whole lot whether you do a VM on Azure Web Services or a Microsoft Azure data center, as long as you're not looking to take advantage of other Microsoft services. I could combine some of those software as a service offerings with data that I'm pulling into my infrastructure as a service databases. I could push that data out into blob storage to then be able to consume an HD Insight cluster or to pull in using Polybase into SQL DW. I mean, so that's the thing is if you're in their data center, it gives you a lot more offerings. I mean, think of hosting something outside of your own data center. If you host it outside of your data center, you're not able to access, unless you have a trusted relationship, anything within there. And you immediately go, well, here's all the things I can't do now. Same thing. If you go to Amazon, again, VMs, just fine. But if you're looking to access things from the Microsoft data center, there's not a way to connect to that right now. Microsoft's doing a lot for cooperative, to be cooperative. Sorry, that might not be a word. But right now, there's not a way to access those services from AWS. Great
Okay.
questions.
How does Active Directory implementation with the cloud work?
Okay, so you're going to stretch some of my limitations here. There's two ways that I know that you can do this. One is using infrastructure as a service. You could set up a site-to-site VPN network that has a trusted relationship with your data center. You could set up an infrastructure as a service host that will be a domain controller, and you could copy the credentials from your domain controller across so that that virtual network that you set up in Azure will use the same credentials up there. And it would essentially be like setting up another leg of your data center at that point in time. Another way that you could do this is if you're using Office 365 and you're a small business, you could have your Active Directory managed via O65, and your O65 account can then connect with infrastructure as a service. If you go completely the cloud route, that gives you the capabilities to use that Active Directory to be able to cross-populate on other services that are built within Azure. I would honestly have to punt on if I could pull in the AD from there into an infrastructure as a service machine. I would assume there's probably a way to do it, but I haven't attempted to try that yet.
Okay. How will Data Lake differ from HD Insight?
Oh, that's a great question, and I can't give you a lot of answers right now versus what's been publicly presented. So I would encourage you to go to Channel 9 because I know they talked a little bit about Data Lake in some of the previews, but that's still being worked on in Microsoft. So they've presented some things, but I don't think it's anything I can talk about yet. But great question. One thing I would look at, though, is just from a conceptual standpoint, data lake is going to be a mass amount of storage. You could always point an HD Insight cluster at some of that storage to be able to consume some of that data. But data lake's core idea is when you look at it's at the huge amount of storage that you need for documents, emails, videos, a lot of stuff that you have within your organization, big data that you might be landing from Twitter sentiment or machine data. This is supposed to be that petabyte level storage hub where you could go in and you could pull and you could access some of that data. So the idea is this lake is going to literally let you land a lot of data there that you could then aggregate in different ways within the cloud through some of the connected services and technologies. So that's one way I think I could say that it differentiates, but Microsoft will have a lot more on that in the future.
Okay. Have you used data sync for replication on-prem to Azure?
I have not used data sync from on-prem to Azure. And I think this is using the Sync Services Framework. I'll be honest, I went one place and I utilized Sync, and I really didn't like it that well, and what we ended up doing was we ripped it out and we ended up using infrastructure as a service replication with an XML format on the back end to be able to get down to iOS devices and things like that that could consume XML. So I don't have a lot of experience with Sync. Sorry about that.
Okay. Is SharePoint in the cloud a full version with all the functions?
I believe it is. So when you license things in the cloud, one of the things to take a look at is there's different SKUs for the cloud. This gets into that black, dark voodoo magic that is Microsoft licensing. There's different SKUs for the cloud, just like there's different editions. I'll be dead honest with you. At Pragmatic Works, we've ate our own dog food. We're using Office 365. We're using their cloud systems internally. We're using their SharePoint system internally, and we're also using platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. I've got a couple servers left that we're doing a couple infrastructure things with, but for the most part, we've moved fully to the cloud. And it was one of those things where if we were going to talk about it that much, we wanted to make sure that we were actually good customers of it, so we could use our own business experience to talk about it. I have not noticed any issues with SharePoint. I can't remember the SKU we're using off the top of my head, but I know that there are different SKUs, and we recently increased memory and storage because we use it a lot. We store a lot of information. We have a lot of team sites. We're looking at setting up different workflows. I have not noticed a limitation. Brad Schatt, when he does a presentation, though, he's working pretty heavily on this. He'd be a good person to ping with that question. So come back for Brad. His name's Brad. You can't go wrong with that. So come back and ask that question to Brad. But I have not noticed any limitations versus the enterprise level SharePoint that I have used with other companies and what we're using internally. And it is fully through our Office 365 subscription.
Okay. Will Azure DW be different than PDW?
Yes. I'm not sure. I think I said about as much on that as I could. But if you logically understand an APS and you look at separating compute from storage, you would understand that natively that's going to change the way that some T-SQL is done for distributions and things of that nature. I think that's about all I can say at this point in time. But yes, it will be a little bit different. Now, it will be a lot alike in that you can scale up a lot. It will be a lot alike in the fact that it's going to have T-SQL support, it's going to have Polybase. If you're using an APS and you go over to SQL DW, you're going to have to learn a little bit, look at things a little bit differently, but it's not going to be a huge jump. It's going to be like going from writing a medium-sized bicycle to a slightly larger bicycle, which is saying something because the APS is definitely the big bicycle out there. But what they're looking at doing for the SQL DW scale, I think they've said this in the release notes, but they're looking at going way up there, and it's going to be pretty cool. So I think that's all I can say about that.
Okay. I know you talked about this a little bit already, but someone wants you to compare Azure with Rackspace, Amazon, and others in the same place.
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about Amazon. So when you go to Rackspace and some of the other folks, the key thing to remember is they are virtualization hardware sitting in their own data center. Again, they've got great offerings. I have nothing wrong with their VMs, but the key thing to keep in mind is if you have other technologies that you want to take advantage of, being able to consume data in different ways using different technologies that sit and reside within Microsoft data centers, you're going to have to go to a Microsoft data center. And while I'm speaking about that, a couple things to realize as well. Those technologies that are offered are not 100% across all Azure data centers. There are some Azure data centers in other countries that do not have specific things rolled out. When things go generally available, they are generally available in every Azure data center. When they are in beta, they may only be in specific data centers within the United States of America, within Europe. I know they've got some in Japan, they've got them in Australia, so it depends on where the rollout is. So that's the thing is when you look for the availability of a service, one of the key things to look for is which data center, when it's in private preview or in beta, that it actually resides in, because you would need, again, your infrastructure to be there if you need to access that. All these data centers, you can get data from one data center to another within the Microsoft Data Center framework, but you really want to make sure that you look at what data centers that you want to utilize and what services are available in them. Again, when something is generally available, it's out there for everybody. When we are in beta, though, there are only specific data centers that something will reside
in. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have for right now. But if you guys do have any questions, Brad gave his contact information. Brad, do you want to put that up again just so people can see it?
Oh, yep. Hold on. Let's see. Hold on. Let me see if I can get this a little bit more quicker. There we go.
So that's all of Brad's contact information. Again, we always record the session, so this will be posted by the end of the week. And as Brad said earlier in his session, he will be posting everything on his blog, correct?
Yep, I will get that up quickly.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for sticking with me. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.